missed train. Naomi Carter had never felt so heavy in her own skin as she did that Thursday evening. The winter winds of Philadelphia nipped at her cheeks, tugging at the hem of her gray coat as she hurried along the familiar stretch toward the train station. Her day had been one of those merciless marathons at work, the kind that left her wondering why she had chosen this career in the first place. Emails had piled up, meetings had stretched endlessly, and her manager had found yet another way to load extra tasks on her plate just as she was packing up to leave. At 35, Naomi often reminded herself she was building a life worth having, that the sacrifices of today would become the rewards of tomorrow. But tonight she didn't feel rewarded at all. She felt drained, as though her soul had been squeezed like a lemon until there was nothing left but bitter rind. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement, echoing her sense of urgency. She clutched her worn leather handbag tighter against her side, balancing her scarf with the other hand, wishing she could just teleport straight to her apartment. Her little one-bedroom flat was not fancy, but it was hers, her quiet sanctuary filled with secondhand books, a couch that had molded to her shape, and the comfort of silence after long days of noise. She imagined herself curled up there already, sipping the last of her peppermint tea, perhaps watching an old film she had seen 100 times but always loved. But between her and that quiet relief stood one final obstacle: the train. The loudspeaker boomed through the station as she descended the wide stairs, the voice tinny yet urgent. Track 7. Last eastbound service for the night now boarding. Naomi's heart tightened. She picked up her pace, weaving between clusters of commuters who seemed to have all the time in the world, dragging suitcases, chatting on phones, lingering in each other's way. She wanted to shout at them to move, to understand that she could not afford to miss this one. Missing this train meant waiting for the late bus that took twice as long and dropped her miles from her neighborhood, or else spending money she didn't have on a rideshare. Her budget was already stretched like an old rubber band. One more pull and it might snap. She reached the wide concrete platform and exhaled sharply when she saw the bright silver body of the train waiting, its headlights glowing like a promise. Relief surged through her. She could still make it. She began to run, the cold air burning her lungs as she darted forward, her eyes fixed on the conductor near the doors, hand raised in that familiar gesture to signal last boarding. But then something caught her eye. Near the far end of the platform, just a few feet from the yellow line that marked danger's edge, an elderly man struggled with a collapsing paper bag. Naomi slowed almost against her will, her breath catching in her throat. The bag had torn open, scattering groceries across the ground. Apples rolled away in every direction, one bouncing so dangerously close to the track she feared it would tumble onto the rails. A loaf of bread lay face down on the grimy cement. A carton of milk leaked from a corner, leaving a slow white trail. And there he was, the old man, bending stiffly, clutching a wooden cane in one hand, trying and failing to gather his things with the other. His movements were shaky, unsteady, and for one terrifying second Naomi thought he might topple headfirst onto the tracks. People streamed past him like water around a rock, their eyes flicking for a second before moving away, their bodies bent toward their own destinations. No one stopped. No one slowed. He was invisible, and yet to Naomi he was all she could see. Her chest tightened with conflict. If she hurried now, she could still make the train. She could pretend she hadn't seen, just like everyone else. She could reach the warmth of her apartment, the peppermint tea, the safety of her couch. But if she stopped, she knew what it meant. The train doors would close. She would be left standing in this cold with nothing but exhaustion and frustration to show for her kindness. "Come on," she muttered under her breath, as if willing her feet to keep moving. But they didn't. She froze, torn between responsibility and empathy, between her own needs and the sight of this frail man fumbling with a broken bag and trembling hands. The train's warning chime rang out, sharp and urgent. Naomi's eyes darted back to the conductor, who was already looking toward her direction, one hand hovering near the signal button. The doors were about to close. If she ran now, she could still make it. She knew she could. But her eyes slid back to the old man just as he bent once more, his cane wobbling dangerously. She could see the tremor in his fingers, the weakness in his frame, and something inside her broke, without another thought. Naomi spun on her heel and sprinted, not toward the train but toward the old man. Her knees hit the cold cement as she dropped down beside him, her fingers reaching quickly to gather the runaway apples before they could roll any farther. "Here, let me help you," she said, her voice gentle but firm, cutting through the sound of footsteps and station announcements. The man let out a strained chuckle, his voice gravelly yet kind. "Thank you, miss. Thought I had it handled, but my hands don't do what they used to." "That's all right," Naomi replied, scooping up the loaf of bread and brushing it off before slipping it back into the torn bag. "Groceries can be tricky even for me, and I don't have a cane." They shared a small smile, a brief human connection in the middle of the chaos. Naomi lifted the leaking milk carton carefully and grimaced. "This one's done for, though," she said softly. "I'm afraid your coffee tomorrow might have to do without." The man sighed, but his eyes twinkled with humor. "Well, there goes tomorrow's breakfast. Maybe I'll just settle for toast." Behind them, the train let out its final chime. Naomi's head whipped around just in time to see the doors slide shut with a hiss. The conductor gave one last glance down the platform before signaling, and the train began to move, wheels grinding against the rails with a finality that pierced Naomi's chest. She'd missed it. The last train home was gone. For a moment, frustration surged in her like a tide. She wanted to curse, to stomp her foot, to rage at the unfairness of it all. She had been so close. She had needed that train. Now she was stranded, and the long night stretched before her with no easy solution. But when she turned back to the old man, she saw something that stilled her anger. Gratitude was etched across his face, so clear and raw that it softened every sharp edge in her heart. His eyes, glistening under the harsh fluorescent lights, seemed to hold more than simple thanks. They held recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of her choice. Naomi's shoulders relaxed. She took a deep breath, the anger draining away like water slipping through her fingers. For all her weariness, for all her disappointment, she knew deep down she had done the right thing. And sometimes, she reminded herself, the right thing never came with applause or reward. It came with peace. As she finished gathering the last of his groceries and helped him steady the torn bag, the man placed a trembling hand on her arm. His grip was surprisingly firm for his frailty, and his eyes locked onto hers. "You've given me more help than you know tonight," he said quietly. "I won't forget it." Naomi opened her mouth to reply, but the station lights flickered overhead, and the reality of her situation hit her once again. The train was gone. The platform was nearly empty now. The night was cold, and her journey home had just become a whole lot harder. She forced a small smile anyway, steadying the old man as he shifted his weight onto his cane. "It's all right," she said softly. "We all need a little help sometimes." And though she didn't realize it then, that single missed train, that single choice to help a stranger, would change the entire course of her life. An unexpected connection. The wind had grown sharper by the time Naomi helped the old man steady his bag, tucking what remained of his groceries into the least torn corner of the paper sack. She glanced down at the leaking carton of milk again, sighing quietly to herself, then brushed her hands against her coat as though to rid them of both the dust of the platform and the sense of disappointment still lodged in her chest. The train was gone, the platform nearly deserted, and the sound of its fading wheels seemed to mock her as it disappeared into the tunnels. The night would be long, she thought, but she tried to push the frustration aside. The old man adjusted his grip on the cane, leaning slightly toward her. Up close, Naomi could see him more clearly. His hair was a cloud of white curls, thinning but still abundant, his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that only years of laughter and hardship could carve together. His coat was worn, not shabby but clearly old, with buttons that had lost their shine. Yet his eyes, clear, gray, and searching, were alive with an energy that surprised her. "You look like someone who had a train to catch," he said after a moment, his voice carrying that low, gravelly warmth. Naomi let out a soft laugh, though it was tinged with resignation. "I did, and I missed it, but—" She gestured toward his bag with a small shrug. "I suppose it wasn't meant to be." The man studied her for a beat, then smiled. "Funny thing about life. The doors you rush to catch often close right in your face, but sometimes the doors you never planned to open lead you where you need to be." Naomi tilted her head slightly at his words. She was not in the mood for philosophy. Her feet ached, her body longed for her couch, and the weight of a long week pressed on her shoulders. But there was something about his tone, the measured patience of it, that made her pause. "That sounds like something you've had experience with." His smile widened, showing the edges of teeth that were not quite straight but somehow gave his face more character. Oh, I've had more doors slam in my life than I can count. But a few unexpected ones opened too. And wouldn't you know it, those were the ones that changed everything. They began to walk slowly toward the exit together, Naomi adjusting her stride to match his uneven pace. The station was quieter now, the clatter of earlier commuters replaced by the echo of their footsteps. Naomi held back the urge to check her phone for bus schedules, for reasons she couldn't fully explain. She felt compelled to listen to him to stretch this moment just a little longer. "Do you live far from here?" she asked after a silence. "Not too far," he replied, his cane tapping lightly against the concrete. "A few blocks, though it feels longer when my knees are in one of their moods. I usually catch that same train you were running for. Tonight I was too slow. Hands gave out on me." He shook his head lightly, then chuckled. "And I suppose my bag wasn't built for battle." Naomi smiled despite herself. "I don't think any bag is built for that kind of battle. Don't worry about the milk, I'm sure tomorrow will sort itself out." He looked at her sideways then, his eyes twinkling again. "You remind me of someone I used to know, always saying tomorrow will sort itself out. Only difference is she never believed it when she said it. There was a weight in his words, the kind that carried both memory and regret." Naomi glanced at him, curiosity stirring. "Was she your wife?" The old man nodded slowly. "For 42 years. She passed 5 winters ago." His tone was gentle, steady, but Naomi heard the tremor beneath it. "And not a day goes by that I don't hear her voice telling me to stop fussing, that tomorrow will fix itself." Naomi's heart softened. She thought of her own life, of the loneliness that sometimes crept in when she returned to her apartment after long days. She had friends, yes, but most were scattered across the city, absorbed in their own lives and families. She hadn't had a serious relationship in years, partly by choice, partly by circumstance. Listening to this man speak of a 42-year bond was like hearing of a treasure she wasn't sure she would ever find. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been hard." He gave a slow nod. "It was, still is. But grief teaches you things. Teaches you what really matters. Teaches you how little time we truly have." Naomi nodded, the words landing heavier than she expected. She thought of her office, the endless hours, the constant pressure to climb higher, to prove herself worthy in a place where promotions were rare and gratitude rarer still. She thought of how little joy she sometimes felt in the grind, how many evenings like this she had trudged home too tired to live her life outside of work, how little time we truly have. They reached the exit of the station, and Naomi could feel the night air pressing colder against her skin. Streetlights flickered along the sidewalk, their orange glow casting long shadows. She hesitated, realizing her choice. She could walk away now, search for a bus, and this moment would fade into memory. Or she could take another step into the unknown, extend the conversation, and see where it led. She glanced at the old man again. His groceries sagged in the torn bag, and his cane trembled slightly as he leaned on it. Something in her heart refused to leave him just yet. "Do you need help carrying that home?" she asked. "I don't mind walking with you." He looked at her as though surprised, then nodded slowly. "If it's not too much trouble, I'd be grateful." So they set off together down the quiet city streets side by side. The sidewalks were uneven, lined with bare trees that rattled in the wind. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights streaking across the darkened pavement, and in that quiet walk the conversation between them deepened. He told her his name, Mr. Ellis, and about the years he had spent as a school teacher before retirement. He spoke of the students who had tested his patience and the few who had gone on to become doctors, lawyers, and leaders. He laughed about how some of them still sent him letters, calling him the reason they ever believed in themselves. Naomi listened, drawn in by the way his stories carried both humor and meaning. And then, when she shared pieces of her own life, her job, her struggles to find fulfillment, the exhaustion that clung to her nights, Mr. Ellis listened with a kind of attentiveness she wasn't used to. No interruption, no judgment, just quiet understanding. "You know," he said finally, "sometimes the life we build for ourselves is only half the picture. The other half is what we give. And too often we forget to ask, am I giving anything that matters?" Naomi felt her throat tighten at the words. She didn't answer, not right away, but she knew the question would follow her long after this night ended. By the time they reached his small brick apartment building, Naomi had almost forgotten the train she'd missed. The old man turned to her, gratitude etched across every line of his face. "You didn't just help me with groceries tonight," he said softly. "You gave me company when I needed it. You reminded me that kindness still exists." He reached into his pocket then, pulling out a small folded slip of paper. "Here, my number. If you ever need anything or even just someone to listen, you call me." Naomi hesitated, the paper warm in her hand. She smiled, tucking it into her bag. "Thank you, Mr. Ellis, and take care of yourself." As she turned to leave, heading back toward the bus stop she dreaded, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that her night had shifted in some invisible way. She had missed a train, yes, but she had gained something else. Something she couldn't yet name, but that felt like the beginning of a door she hadn't realized was opening. Doors begin to open. Naomi woke the next morning to the sound of her alarm cutting sharply through the stillness of her bedroom. For a few moments she lay there staring at the ceiling, her body still heavy with exhaustion but her mind alive with thoughts from the night before. The image of Mr. Ellis lingered vividly. The way his hands trembled as he bent to gather the apples. The way his eyes carried both loss and kindness, and the way his words had slipped past her defenses to settle deep inside her. Sometimes the life we build is only half the picture. The other half is what we give. She had thought of those words long after she caught the slow midnight bus, long after she trudged the cold walk from her stop to her apartment, long after she curled on the couch with no tea to comfort her. Even in sleep, it seemed, her mind had carried them like a whisper. And now, as the gray light of morning pressed through her curtains, they refused to fade. She rose slowly, went through her routine: coffee, shower, a plain blouse paired with the same slacks she wore every Thursday, and tried to focus on the day ahead. But the office felt even more suffocating than usual. The endless meetings, the recycled complaints, the forced smiles, all of it grated against her nerves. Every time she looked at her computer screen, she caught herself drifting back to that walk with Mr. Ellis, to his calm voice and the way he had listened to her without rushing to fix her, without judgment. It was a rare gift in a world where everyone seemed too busy to truly hear anyone else. At lunch, instead of eating with her usual colleagues who spent most of the hour gossiping about office politics, Naomi slipped outside with her sandwich and pulled the folded slip of paper from her bag. Mr. Ellis's handwriting was neat, but a little shaky, his phone number written with deliberate care. She hesitated for a moment, tapping her phone against her leg. Was it strange to call him? Would it seem intrusive? But then she remembered the way he had pressed the paper into her hand, the way he had said, "If you ever need anything or even just someone to listen, you call me." Taking a breath, Naomi dialed the number. It rang twice before a familiar gravelly voice answered. "Hello? Mr. Ellis? It's Naomi. From last night." "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice brightening. "Naomi Carter, the young lady who saved my breakfast. How are you today?" She laughed softly, easing into the call. "Tired, as usual. But I wanted to say thank you. For the talk, for sharing your stories. It stayed with me. I'm glad," he said warmly. "Conversations are like seeds, you know. Sometimes they take root when we least expect it." They spoke for nearly 20 minutes, Naomi surprised at how natural it felt. He asked her about her work, about her passions, about the things she once dreamed of doing before life pressed her into routine. She found herself confessing more than she expected, that she had always loved writing, that she once pictured herself working in publishing or even writing books of her own, but those dreams had been quietly buried beneath deadlines and bills. Mr. Ellis didn't laugh, didn't dismiss her words as fanciful. He simply said, "Dreams buried under duty still breathe, Naomi. Sometimes they just need the right air to rise again." By the end of the call, Naomi felt lighter. She tucked her phone back into her bag with a small smile and returned to her desk with a focus she hadn't felt in months. Days passed, and she found herself calling Mr. Ellis again, then again. Sometimes their conversations were short, a check-in, a shared joke, a story from his years as a teacher. Other times they stretched into the evening, their voices bridging the quiet loneliness each carried in their own way. Slowly a bond formed, unexpected, unlikely, yet deeply real. One chilly Saturday, Mr. Ellis invited her to join him at a small community center not far from his apartment. "They've got a reading program for kids," he explained. "I sometimes help out when my knees allow. Thought you might like it." Naomi hesitated, her natural instinct to decline tugging at her. She guarded her weekends fiercely. They were her only time to rest, but something in his voice compelled her to agree. That afternoon, she found herself in a modest room filled with shelves of worn books and the chatter of children. The air smelled faintly of crayons and dust. A handful of volunteers were already there, greeting kids with warmth. And there was Mr. Ellis, seated near the front, his cane resting against a chair, his face alight with energy she hadn't seen before. "Naomi," he called, waving her over. "Everyone, this is the young lady I told you about." She felt her cheeks warm but smiled as the children crowded around, curious and eager. Within minutes she was seated with a small group, helping them sound out words from dog-eared storybooks. The experience was both humbling and invigorating. These children, some shy, some brimming with mischief, looked at her with wide eyes as though every word she guided them through mattered. And in that moment, Naomi felt something stir inside her, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Afterward, as the children dispersed and the volunteers tidied up, Mr. Ellis leaned close. "See, you have a gift, not just with words but with people. You should use it." Naomi shook her head lightly, half embarrassed. "It was just reading." "No," he said firmly, his gray eyes steady. "It was connection. Don't underestimate that. Too many people spend their lives searching for connection and never find it." As they walked out together, Naomi thought about his words. He had a way of turning the simplest observations into truths that lingered, truths that reshaped how she saw herself. In the weeks that followed, Naomi found herself returning to the community center, sometimes with Mr. Ellis, sometimes on her own. She began helping with the reading program regularly, her once empty weekends filling with laughter, stories, and the quiet pride of watching children improve under her guidance. She still worked her demanding office job, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer saw herself as just another tired employee chasing deadlines. She was part of something bigger, something meaningful. And then one evening, as she and Mr. Ellis walked back from the center, he revealed something that stunned her. "You know, Naomi," he said casually, leaning on his cane, "before I retired, I wasn't just a schoolteacher. I was also on the board of that very center. In fact, I still keep in touch with a few of the folks who run it. They've been talking about expanding the program, maybe even starting a mentorship initiative for young writers. I thought of you immediately." Naomi stopped in her tracks. "Me? Why me?" "Because," he said, his smile kind but firm, "I see the way those children look at you. I hear the way you talk about writing. Even when you don't realize how much your voice shines when you do, you have something to give, Naomi, and the world is waiting for you to give it." Her throat tightened, her chest swelling with emotions she couldn't name. For so long she had buried her passions under practicality, convincing herself they were luxuries she couldn't afford. But here was this man, this stranger turned friend, seeing her more clearly than she had seen herself in years. That night, as Naomi returned to her apartment, she sat at her small kitchen table with a notebook open before her. For the first time in years, she began to write. Words spilled onto the page, tentative at first, then flowing more freely. Stories she had once silenced began to breathe again. And in that quiet room, pen scratching against paper, Naomi realized something profound. Missing that train had not been an accident. It had been the beginning of a doorway, one that was now opening wider with every step she dared to take. The unexpected ripple of kindness, the days that followed felt like a whirlwind for Danielle. She had not expected her choice on that platform, the simple act of missing her train to help an elderly man, to ripple out into her life so dramatically. Yet slowly and quietly, that one moment of compassion began to weave its way into everything she touched. At first, it was the small changes she noticed. She found herself walking to work with more awareness, no longer buried in her phone or hurrying past the faces of strangers. She noticed the woman at the corner cafe who always smiled while serving coffee, but had tired eyes as if carrying her own burdens. She noticed the bus driver who seemed invisible to half the passengers, offering a cheerful greeting every morning. She noticed the homeless man who sat with his head bowed outside the station steps, his presence often ignored like just another piece of the city's landscape. Danielle began to realize how much of life she had been rushing past. That missed train had slowed her down in more ways than one, and with the slowing came a deeper connection to the world around her. One evening, as she sat across from Mr. Whitaker, the elderly man she had helped, She found herself sharing thoughts she had never said aloud before. His small apartment was cluttered yet cozy, filled with old books, framed photographs, and relics from a life fully lived. A faint aroma of peppermint tea hung in the air, soothing and warm. He leaned back in his worn chair, his cane resting against the side, and asked her a simple question. "Why do you think you stopped for me that night, Danielle, when so many others just kept walking?" She paused, realizing she hadn't truly thought about it beyond the instinct of the moment. "I guess," she began slowly, "because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to feel like no one notices when you're struggling." Her voice cracked slightly at the confession. Mr. Whitaker nodded knowingly, his wise eyes fixed on her as if he saw straight through to her soul. "That," he said gently, "is the very thing that makes kindness so powerful. Only those who have been unseen truly understand the gift of being seen." That conversation stayed with her long after she left his home. It echoed in her heart while she walked through the busy streets of Philadelphia, while she sat at her desk in the marketing firm, even while she lay awake at night staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, Danielle felt that her life was not just about surviving from one day to the next, but about discovering meaning in the small and ordinary choices she made. She started looking for opportunities to extend her hand to others, not because she wanted recognition, but because it felt like breathing life into her own weary soul. On the subway one morning, she gave up her seat for a young mother struggling with 2 toddlers and a stroller. At work, she defended a quiet intern whose ideas were being brushed aside in meetings. On the street, she paused to talk to the homeless man outside the station, learning that his name was Aaron and that once, years ago, he had worked in construction until an injury and bad luck left him without shelter. She began buying him sandwiches, not out of pity, but to share a human connection. Each act, small as it was, seemed to lighten something inside her that she hadn't even realized was so heavy. Her colleagues began noticing a change in her too. The woman who used to avoid eye contact in the hallways now greeted people with warmth. The employee who once kept her head down during meetings began offering insights with quiet confidence. Even her manager, notorious for his endless demands, seemed surprised when Danielle started handling challenges with calm instead of frustration. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply approaching her life differently, through the lens of empathy, through the realization that everyone was carrying their own unseen load. This transformation did not go unnoticed. During a quarterly review, her manager commented, "Danielle, I don't know what's changed in you lately, but your leadership qualities are shining through. Have you ever considered applying for the open project coordinator role?" She was stunned. She had never thought of herself as leadership material, always too hesitant to put herself forward. Yet here she was, being recognized for qualities she didn't even realize she was showing. When she told Mr. Whitaker about it, his face broke into a smile that lit up his entire expression. "You see, Danielle," he said with conviction, "the seeds you plant in others always find a way of growing back into your own life. The world has a way of rewarding those who dare to slow down and care." His words struck her deeply, and she realized something profound. She had not helped him just for his sake, but in helping him, she had also saved herself from a life of quiet emptiness. That night, as she walked home, she passed the train station, the same place where it had all begun. She paused for a moment, standing in the cold air as trains rumbled by, and thought about how easily her life could have gone another way. If she had chosen the train that night, she would have gone home, perhaps grumbled about her exhausting day and woken up to another one just like it. Nothing would have changed. But she hadn't taken the train. She had taken the harder, slower path, and in that choice she had opened a door she never knew existed. The true weight of that realization settled into her bones as she reflected on her own journey. Sometimes we think the life-changing events are the big moments, the promotions, the moves, the losses, the dramatic encounters. But often it's the quiet, seemingly small decisions that define everything. Missing that train, stopping for groceries, kneeling down beside an old man who could have been ignored. That was the moment that altered her entire course. Danielle's life was no longer about simply getting from one day to the next. It was about leaning into the unexpected, embracing the chance to make a difference, and allowing herself to be transformed in return. And so, in the weeks ahead, Danielle stepped into the new project coordinator role with courage she never knew she had. She carried with her not just the skills she had honed at work, but the compassion she had practiced in her daily life. She became a bridge builder in her office, someone who noticed when others felt left out, someone who stood up when voices were silenced. Slowly but surely, her story became an example for those around her. Proof that kindness is not weakness but strength, the kind that can ripple outward and touch countless lives. And at the center of it all was one decision, one act of humanity that she never regretted. The door she never knew was waiting. Winter slowly gave way to spring in the city, and with it came new beginnings that Danielle could hardly have predicted. The days grew longer, the air softer, and the streets filled with the sound of budding life. Street musicians on corners, flower vendors setting out colorful bouquets, children skipping over cracked sidewalks. Danielle, too, was blossoming in her own way. The project coordinator role, once intimidating, began to feel like second nature. She discovered she had a natural ability to bring people together, to listen when others dismissed, and to find solutions where tension used to thrive. Yet it wasn't just her job that flourished. It was her sense of self. She no longer carried herself as the weary woman who had once clutched her bag and dashed for the last train of the night. She carried herself with quiet strength, the kind that comes from knowing you have chosen a path not of convenience but of meaning. But life, in its mysterious way, had another chapter waiting to unfold. One afternoon, her phone buzzed with a call from Mr. Whitaker's number. She answered cheerfully, but the voice on the other end was not his. It was his daughter, a soft-spoken woman named Margaret who lived 2 states away. Her words came slowly, heavy with both gratitude and worry. Mr. Whitaker had been hospitalized after a minor fall, and while he was stable, Margaret admitted she could not travel immediately due to her own family commitments. "He keeps asking for you," she said. Danielle's heart clenched. She had only known Mr. Whitaker for a few months, yet their connection had deepened so quickly that hearing this did not surprise her. Without hesitation, she promised she would visit him that evening. The hospital room was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic beeping of machines. When Danielle walked in, Mr. Whitaker's tired face lit up. "Ah, my guardian angel," he whispered with a weak smile. She pulled a chair close to his bed, holding his frail hand in hers. "Don't you start calling me that," she teased gently, though her eyes brimmed with tears. They talked for hours, not about illness or pain, but about life. His memories of youth, his late wife's laughter, his regrets and triumphs. He told her about the years he had worked as a teacher, how he had poured himself into guiding young minds, and how he feared the world sometimes forgot the simple power of kindness. "But you," he said softly, "reminded me it's still alive." Danielle squeezed his hand, humbled that he saw her that way when in truth, she felt it was he who had changed her. In the days that followed, she visited often, sometimes bringing flowers or reading aloud from his favorite books. She grew close to Margaret, too, who marveled at the bond between her father and this woman who had once been a stranger. "It's as though you've given him a new lease on life," Margaret confided one evening in the hospital corridor. Danielle shook her head. "He's the one who's given that to me." Their friendship deepened, built on shared gratitude and recognition of the unseen ways lives can intertwine. When Mr. Whitaker was finally discharged, Danielle helped set up his home for easier living. New railings by the steps, organized shelves, even a small basket service from the local grocer, so he wouldn't struggle carrying heavy bags. It was work, yes, but it was never a burden. In caring for him, she discovered a joy she hadn't known existed, the joy of giving without expectation, of loving without measure. She thought often about her own parents, both gone now, and how fate had somehow placed this man in her path to remind her that family is not always about blood, but about choice. Months later, an unexpected letter arrived at her office. It bore the letterhead of a community foundation in Philadelphia. Curious, she tore it open, and what she read left her speechless. Mr. Whitaker had nominated her for a local humanitarian award, detailing the night she had stopped to help him, and the countless acts of kindness she had carried out since. "She sees people," his nomination letter read, "in a world where most choose to look away." Danielle blinked back tears, humbled and almost embarrassed. Recognition was never her goal, but as she sat with the letter in her hands, she realized it was bigger than her. The award wasn't about her name on a plaque. It was a reminder, a call, a chance to amplify the message that had become her life, that one small act can change everything. The award ceremony was held in a modest hall downtown, attended by community members, colleagues, and friends. Danielle stood nervously at the podium when her name was announced. The lights felt hot, her palms damp. But then she spotted Mr. Whitaker in the front row, leaning proudly on his cane, his smile steady and sure. Taking a deep breath, she spoke, not about achievements or recognition, but about the night she missed her train. She painted the picture vividly, the apples rolling, the milk carton bursting, the choice between rushing forward and slowing down. That night, she said, her voice carrying across the silent room, I thought I had missed an opportunity. What I didn't realize was that I had been given one instead. Helping someone else was not the end of my journey. It was the beginning. It changed the way I see the world, and it changed the way I see myself. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. That night, as Danielle walked home from the ceremony, she thought about the strange and beautiful ways life had unfolded. She thought of her younger self, weary and invisible, rushing through life without ever stopping to notice. She thought of the old man on the platform, groceries scattered, dignity slipping through his trembling hands, and she thought of the choice she made, not to catch a train but to catch a human being before he fell. That choice had opened doors she hadn't even known existed. It had led her to friendship, purpose, recognition, and most importantly, a deeper understanding of herself. The city around her hummed with life as it always had. Trains still roared, commuters still hurried, people still passed by in their private worlds. But Danielle no longer felt like just another face in the crowd. She felt like a thread in the vast tapestry, woven into the lives of others in ways both seen and unseen. And in that moment, she realized the truth. You don't always get to choose the trains you catch, but you do get to choose the lives you touch along the way. Her story was no longer just about a missed train. It was about a life found, and in the quiet night air, with the city lights shimmering above, Danielle smiled to herself. Grateful beyond words for the day kindness chose her path, and for the fact that she had been brave enough to follow it.